Hello, I'm Matt Reardon, and thanks for watching this Wednesday evening, September 20th West Weather Update, brought to you by Nutrient Ag Solutions. We're starting here just looking at the visible satellite imagery across California. You can see a few other states here. What I'll point your attention to is something we've seen today and then yesterday as well. There are some wildfires burning here in Northern California, far southwest Oregon. That has been continuing. We're in kind of the peak of the wildfire season here in late summer, getting into early fall. The fortunate thing across the West, it has not been, one of these big damaging wildfire seasons like we feared a little bit earlier. Even for the Pacific Northwest, which has had some unfortunate fires this year, I think it could have been worse. We're not totally out of the woods yet. El Nino kind of continues the chance that wildfire season could strengthen a bit given the kind of drought implications going into fall. But as we get into the forecast, you'll see that my concerns for that might be hampered a bit by some of the upcoming changes in the pattern. Nonetheless, we do have some active fires burning here, Southwest Oregon, Northern California, as I mentioned. And because of this Pacific high over here, just bringing these winds down south along the California coastline, it's actually taking that smoke all the way south along the coastline here and wrapping it really into the San Francisco metro area. I have some friends who live over in the metro area there, and they kind of open their windows as you do in San Francisco in the afternoon and evening, and they just got this overwhelming smell of wildfire smoke, and it's really the result of these fires here blowing smoke hundreds of miles away. I did mention that Pacific high. There it is here, the center of this clockwise spin here in the eastern Pacific. And you'll notice it's really kind of ripping the winds right here along the California coastline. When that happens, you develop this kind of natural eddy near San Francisco, and that's just directing that smoke right into the San Francisco area here. So kind of a neat little thing here, perhaps not if you're trying to enjoy a nice breeze in San Francisco this evening. This has prompted some air quality index concerns as well. We saw that, I think, a little bit more yesterday evening. You can see in Northern California, parts of Central California coastline here, dealing with getting into the unhealthy range of air quality indices. Nothing too extreme you'd see in kind of maybe more of the peak wildfire season here. Did want to mention the latest wildfire outlook. We're still somewhat concerned here for the Pacific Northwest. That's due to ongoing drought as one thing here over the summer. The second part of that is, given that we're in this kind of El Nino background state, that tends to increase the risk for drought and some heat in the Pacific Northwest in fall. We haven't started that way, and actually getting into the forecast here to spoil it a little bit, I think we're going to stay wet here out through the next week or two, so that certainly kind of dampens that concern going forward. We'll keep an eye on it getting kind of out into October. Some years we can see that activity linger even into November. We'll just have to keep an eye on it. The good news, California, given some of the rain, obviously over the last spring and last winter, less concern there. Hawaii, unfortunately, that's still a concern there, given, again, that connection with El Nino, increasing drought risk over the islands. Jump over, take another satellite imagery here. I'll make this a little bit more vibrant. Let's get that natural color on there. The big thing that kind of jumps out looking across the Pacific Northwest here is this low pressure system. We kind of talked about this, I think, last Wednesday, the potential for low pressure system to come kind of careening in somewhere from like the northwest toward the southeast. We're seeing that here. This one's spinning really over eastern Washington. And this is an area here in eastern Washington, parts of northwest Montana that have not seen a lot of rain here in the summer. Not typically, the rainiest time of year for this area, but they do get some rain in a typical average year, and they just have not seen it this year. The Willamette Valley missing out on some of this. Could get some kind of spotty showers in here, not expecting anything too significant, but we are seeing showers here move into parts of eastern Washington. I'll just take you over to look at the radar mosaic here. Let me see if we can zoom that in a little bit on eastern Washington, the Walla Walla area, Pullman up here. These areas finally seeing some rainfall. And I think Montana, the Golden Triangle, Great Falls, Fort Benton, that whole area up there could see, or is even likely to see rainfall tonight, getting in tomorrow, maybe even Friday as well. Again, that area too, not seeing a lot of rainfall here recently. In fact, if we just kind of review the drought monitor as of last Thursday, much of the Pacific Northwest in some form of drought, either moderate or even getting into severe or extreme drought in the far northern reaches of the Golden Triangle here. So good news for some folks in here if you're looking for rain or to reduce that drought. We are seeing some rainfall move through this area here today and tomorrow. I wanted to pick on, I believe this is Pullman, Washington here. So right in the Palouse. Again, you can see not a lot of rain even getting into last spring here. This is going all the way out to January 1st of 2023. This curved line here, we've looked at these a few times. That is your average kind of accrual of rainfall throughout the year. This kind of stair-step line here, that's this year, 2023. So you can see how we're really running a deficit here in eastern Washington for much of the year. That's widening here in summer. The good news, rainfall today, very likely if it hasn't already happened, and then we're getting into the more rainy time of year here in the fall. So more rainfall coming. I think that's good news for the drought monitor at the very least. And then jumping over here to Conrad, Montana, kind of in the northern half of that golden triangle here. That drought kind of increasing here this summer as of late. Fortunately, more rainfall coming, I think, tonight, tomorrow, and then into Friday as well for that area. I want to jump over and talk tropics. It's been that kind of year. We're kind of racing through the Pacific hurricane season here. We do have a tropical storm, Kenneth, here in the eastern Pacific. We talked about this one potentially all the way, I think, back on Wednesday, potentially forming over the weekend. We've seen that here. Now we are on Wednesday evening. The good news for the forecast, Kenneth right now expected to kind of linger right here in the central eastern Pacific. The forecasts haven't changed too much. That's expected to kind of weaken, move to the north over some of the colder water here, and really kind of peter out, not affecting the western U.S. or Hawaii at this time. There are a few other areas of interest here that's kind of confusing. This orange one is its own separate area of concern from the National Hurricane Center from Kenneth. They just happen to be overlapping right now. What they're really watching is a thunderstorm complex here in the far eastern Pacific, which might mosey over here and look to develop this weekend. We also have a lesser probability area of concern here. This one expected to stay, fortunately, well south of Hawaii, which is off the map right about here on this map here. I wouldn't say concerned, but kind of keeping an eye on that orange area of interest I told you about earlier. This is the GFS. We're looking at low pressure systems here. This is kind of where I'm keeping my eye on here in the far eastern Pacific. Hawaii is here. There's the Baja California Peninsula. I'll make this valid as a Wednesday evening here. Here's Kenneth here, that potential undeveloped system here a little bit further to the west of that. I'll take this forecast. We'll quickly go here into Friday. And all of a sudden, Kenneth is gone. So that's why I said that wasn't really a concern. And that has kind of been overtaken here by this next system, likely to move west or potentially west-northwest. This forecast is just from the GFS. I'll stress that now. We kind of look at a number of different model runs to get an idea where these might go. If I take this into Sunday, we actually see it develop into potentially a weak hurricane, certainly a tropical storm here from the GFS, out into Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And if you're kind of following that forecast, the track, at least over those last few days, it looks like it's going on a beeline toward the state and the islands of Hawaii. Now, the good news, and we've talked about this, it seems like every video here this summer and fall, is those ocean temperatures. While in the eastern Pacific, they're warmer than normal in this red color on the map. In fact, the central eastern Pacific being warmer than normal is El Nino, so that's not a huge surprise. That's why we expect a more active Pacific hurricane season during these El Nino late summers and fall. But if you look to the north of that, near Hawaii, we have this cold patch of water. It's been lingering for some time now, all through the summer. And those storm systems, they're kind of fire here. And if they move too far to the west-northwest, they kind of run into this blue wall here east of Hawaii. And they're really going to struggle to maintain any sort of strength. We can see sometimes if they get strong enough, they build up this inertia like a spinning top, and can retain some strength, some gusty winds and showers as they move over the islands, but certainly not expecting anything like, even a weak hurricane at this point. If it wants to get toward Hawaii, it would be as a weak remnant tropical storm or even an extratropical or subtropical low. We'll keep an eye on it. If any impacts were going to come to the state of Hawaii, even in that form of gusty winds or rain, it would be out into next week. So don't want to talk too much about it when the forecast is that uncertain, but we'll keep an eye on it. And then I'll have another tropical update at the end of this video as well, kind of talking about some long-term things that are on my radar as well. The big story here, actually really over the next 7 days, it's not the tropics. We just covered that. Not really the wildfire season yet. We're keeping an eye on that as well. But the big story of the next 7 days is going to be the Pacific jet stream. It's really getting more active. We're seeing this in the forecast now, a lot of agreement here. We're looking at the Pacific jet stream here, valid as of Wednesday afternoon here. This is the low pressure system and the trough associated with it. We talked about all the way last Wednesday, potentially bringing rain to parts of the northwest. That's really kind of ongoing now into tonight, into tomorrow. We talked about the Golden Triangle getting some rainfall. This is also keeping temperatures down across the western U.S. Here's the subtropical jet that was forecast to strengthen. We've seen that here. You can see the subtropical component quite strong in the jet stream. That has weakened the monsoon, pushed a lot of the cloud and rainfall activity off into the upper elevations of the Four Corners. And I'm going to take this forecast out into next week, and you'll see what I'm talking about looking at the Pacific jet stream here in this region. So I take this forecast through Friday. That system that we were just watching kicks out east of the divide. But here comes that what we call extended Pacific jet stream coming down through the Aleutians, very strong, much stronger than where it was when I just took you a few days earlier, even with this trough here. And I'll say these kind of extended Pacific jet stream events are what we watch for atmospheric rivers, for big Pacific Northwest kind of landfalling systems here. And I think that could be on deck as we get out into early next week. This is valid now Saturday morning. I'll take this into Saturday night, then into Sunday. And we can see this Pacific jet stream wrapping up into a big, strong upper level trough here off the coast of British Columbia, funneling a lot of this jet stream here into the Oregon coastline, into the Washington coastline, likely bringing low pressure systems through. Could be strong and windy at times. A bigger story, probably just rainfall. Expecting a lot of rainfall over the Pacific Northwest. The kind of specific amounts aren't totally certain at this time. The models are kind of going back and forth, but even the driest models are bringing quite a bit of widespread rain through parts of Oregon, Washington. Not as rainy, I will say, for the kind of Golden Triangle of Montana. And that's really because this kind of, if you look closely at the direction of the flow, it's still kind of coming right over the mountains, the Bitterroot Ranges in western Montana, and that tends to bring downsloping flow, which is not great for rainfall in western Montana. In fact, kind of the best way to get a lot of rainfall into the Golden Triangle is really what we're seeing tonight and tomorrow, and that's that upslope flow where you actually have this trough here, kind of parked here. We call this a cutoff or closed upper low here because the winds are now moving around it in almost a complete circle here, and we're actually bringing some upslope that's east to west flow in Montana, and that's why we're increasing those rainfall chances here in western Montana tonight, tomorrow, and then into Friday. But if I take this out, there's that big Pacific extension into Monday and Tuesday of next week, expecting a number of low pressure systems to move through Washington, Oregon, Northern California, likely under the gun for some of this rainfall as well. Can't rule out some rainfall or showers getting into the Sacramento Valley here, not nearly as much, obviously, than some of the mountain regions in the Klamath. But this area is going to be active next week, potentially starting as early as Sunday, getting into Monday, Tuesday, probably fading away at some point then. I'll take this forecast all the way out to Tuesday afternoon here, but we still see that flow oriented over Washington here. One reason I think we're seeing this big extension in the Pacific jet stream might relate to the MJO. That's the Madden-Julian oscillation. We really look at this as an indicator to see if something's going to change up or bring about a big trough or something to get thrown into the system here to kind of shake us out of the current pattern. And the MJO, we're expecting it to amplify, potentially moving into somewhere into the central or western Pacific here, getting toward October. And that movement in the MJO, that transitioning kind of out of the Indian Ocean into the Pacific Ocean, we think might be juicing the jet stream here and bringing that low pressure system, that atmospheric river chance to parts of the Pacific Northwest. So we're keeping an eye on this to see where we might go after that as well. I want to show you, this is looking at the GFS 7-day forecast for precipitation anomalies, and we can see widespread area here in Washington, western Oregon, parts of Idaho here for some increased rainfall. The area you see here in Montana, that's likely kind of this first system just kind of moving and exiting out of the area here Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But I'll take this forecast even all the way out into next week, and you can see this area here in Washington and Oregon expecting some increased above average rainfall for some areas here. If I take this over, maybe see if we can get some rainfall totals here for that whole area. That's just from the NBM, so one model run here. But you can see quickly, if I take this out into rainfall totals to Wednesday of next week, we'll zoom in here on the Pacific Northwest. 2 inches plus in parts of the Willamette Valley, even getting some significant rainfall into the Palouse, perhaps toward an inch, maybe a little bit more. Lesser amounts there in the rain shadows of eastern Washington, getting some rainfall into eastern Oregon as well. So this area here kind of under the gun for some increased rainfall. There's some river flooding risk, not too heightened right now. This forecast even looks maybe a little bit too aggressive. One flooding risk that does exist is some of the burn scars in this area that have had wildfires this year might accidentally get into some debris flow from this increased rainfall here. So that's something we're watching as well. But the big news here is an area that's under a lot of different forms of drought, whether it be moderate all the way up to severe, likely to get some very significant rainfall here, heavy at times here getting into early next week starting Sunday. As far as timing, this is looking at 24-hour precipitation totals from the GFS. You can see here this is looking out to Thursday now, and I'll just walk this forecast. We'll take it all the way through the 7-day forecast. You can see the rainfall here expected to fall tonight, continuing in the Palouse, parts of eastern Washington, that upslope flow we talked about in parts of Montana. As I take this forecast through the period, this is getting into Friday or Thursday evening. See increased rainfall here in parts of the Golden Triangle, even getting to parts of the northern Golden Triangle here as we get into Friday afternoon. So really the precipitation chances starting tonight and lingering all the way till Friday afternoon. As we get into Saturday, that system clears out east of the Divide, potentially bringing rainfall to the Midwest and the Central Plains. But even here early Sunday, late Saturday, we're already seeing some rainfall try to creep in here to parts of western Oregon and Washington. As I take this through the period, you can see these systems with that jet stream kind of focused on the Pacific Northwest. We often see these kind of careening low pressure systems coming through one after the other, increasing the rainfall. You get these kind of swings in intensity, and that's likely to continue at least through Tuesday, when you can see it clearing out here in the Pacific Northwest sometime potentially Wednesday evening outright. So that's the forecast going forward, an active week ahead for parts of the Pacific Northwest, Oregon and Washington in particular. But if I take this back, you can see California, Northern California getting in some of this rainfall as well. Temperature-wise, with all this rainfall, the trough coming through, if you're kind of leaning toward the colder side, you'd be correct. Here are the overnight lows forecasted for Thursday, tomorrow morning. Potentially the coldest night that we're going to see, because the winds kind of have died down a little bit on the backside of this low pressure system. So the Willamette Valley looking at mid to low 40s. Similar forecast here in eastern Washington, and the Snake River Valley maybe a little bit cooler. Can't rule out frost perhaps in some of these areas straddling elevation or a bit higher up, but not expecting any kind of freeze threat right now. Just a little bit too early here in late September. I think I said this last week, that'll change as we get into October when we start to get into those climatological first freeze events. Some area here where too we're watching it in the Golden Triangle, potentially some frost in the upper reaches of that. Not expecting a freeze at this time out of this event coming through. So take this through Friday. These are just overnight lows into Saturday. You can see those cooler overnight lows continuing. If we jump over and look at maximum temperature anomalies for the same time period, this is just kind of relative to average, very cold, relative to average in parts of the Pacific Northwest underneath that troughing. And then even getting out into Tuesday of next week, I flip through this quickly. You can see California, Oregon, Washington, even all the way through the lower Colorado River Valley, not seeing much heat. So that's a big change from what we were talking about in July, parts of August, even parts of early September. All the way out through the 7-day forecast, not really seeing any heat concerns or those above average temperatures for the area. We got the Climate Prediction Center, their take on the next work week here. We'll look at the 6 to 10 day outlook. Not a surprise based on that extended Pacific jet stream potential atmospheric river event that they have a big bullseye here now over the parts of the Pacific Northwest, particularly southern Oregon, parts of northern California. In fact, if you circled the wildfires that I showed you at the beginning of this video, that's about the circle you would have drawn here in parts of northern California in the Klamath Mountains here. So good news for fighting wildfires there. In the Pacific Northwest, likely to see above average rainfall as we get out into that next work week here. Looking out a little bit beyond that, there's some chance that we could see that activity continue. If we looked right at the end of that jet stream forecast, looking out into Wednesday of next week, we saw the jet stream kind of still extended, not quite as strong, but still focused on the Pacific Northwest. And if it's doing that, maybe the systems won't be as strong. There won't be as much rainfall kind of out toward the end of next week, but those rain chances will continue, which is why when we covered the wildfires, even at the beginning of this video, I'm less concerned about that risk going forward, despite having that concern going into this fall season. Just this big rain event here, increasing the soil moisture profiles, getting some water into the trees and everything could be good news. One thing I did want to touch on here as we go out into the El Nino forecast going forward, here's sea surface temperature anomalies across the central and eastern Pacific. We can see El Nino continues to strengthen here. Earlier in the year, El Nino was very biased, or at least these warm temperatures were biased in the eastern Pacific, and that's been slowly extending out into the central Pacific, increasing the strength here. One thing we also talked about was all the warmth in the North Pacific, and if you just look at a glance, that's still there. We see all these warm temperature anomalies here in the North Pacific, but we have seen temperatures cool down quite a bit actually in the Gulf of Alaska, and that's this Gulf right here. This is an area that when it gets very warm increases the potential for ridging over British Columbia, parts of Canada, that extends down through the Pacific Northwest as well. The colder ocean temperatures here make that ridging a little bit less likely. The jet stream's less likely to go up and over that colder ocean temperature here in the Gulf of Alaska, more likely to come through here, perhaps through British Columbia or even into Washington and Oregon, kind of like we're seeing in the forecast here. Kind of another caveat here is with El Nino developing in the winter, this is an area I'm watching closely for sea surface temperatures. If I take you all the way back to 2015, the super El Nino, very strong El Nino, it really didn't deliver on the rainfall front in terms of California or some of the reservoirs and the kind of bountiful rains that we were expecting out of a typical El Nino. As much as we say, you can never expect one El Nino to be the same as the other, that one certainly didn't deliver on the waterfront. And if we jump over and just look at the historical sea surface temperatures from December 1st from 2015 and compare them to now, here's 2015. And we saw warm temperature anomalies all the way through the Northeast and Eastern Pacific. I mean, you could draw a line here from the El Nino proper, and you really have warmer ocean waters all along the eastern, or I should say the western coast of North America here, and that could potentially help to divert the jet stream and some of that moisture away from the west coast, leaving that particular, unique El Nino drier than some other ones. So I think if you're looking for a more bountiful water year, kind of the shake up in these ocean temperatures here, if we were able to cool more of the ocean temperatures here just west of California and Oregon, that could be good news for getting something of a more normal El Nino. Forecasting that far out in terms of the water year 3 to 5 months from now, very much an inexact science, but this is just something I'm keeping my eye on closely as we get into October, November, and December. I'll be very curious to compare the ocean temperatures right from December 1st of 2023 to 2015. And one last thing I did want to mention here, one thing we're looking at is a Hofmuller diagram. There's a lot going on in this map. I've explained this before, but it needs to be explained to me a few times that as you go down through the map, you're going out further into the future. This black line running across the middle, that's the present day here, September 20th. And what we're looking at here in the kind of green versus brown colors are the propensity for upward motion across the atmosphere, particularly around the equator. And the green colors here typically increase upward motion for that particular area. And upward motion in the atmosphere, that tends to produce interesting weather, rainfall, hurricanes, and all that. And really what we're looking at here, I think, is the propagation of the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. I mentioned that getting out into the Pacific Ocean. Well, here's our present day. The Madden-Julian Oscillation can kind of be tracked as these kind of green, velocity potential anomalies moving from west to east, and you can see them moving from west to east here through time. And the forecast going forward is for this MJO activity to extend out into the Central Pacific. And then looking at the forecast all the way at the bottom of the graph, the forecast for early October puts the MJO activity all the way over into the Eastern Pacific. And I mentioned that upward motion in the atmosphere tends to help strengthen or even promote hurricane activity. Now, we've seen some what I'll call sinking error, the opposite effect here over the last few weeks, and yet we've still seen tropical storms develop and even hurricanes. With all that anomalous warm water from El Nino, it almost doesn't care that the MJO isn't conducive for hurricanes. It's still producing them, but it hasn't been producing quite as strong of one. We haven't seen, we were talking about Dora earlier in the year. We talked about Hillary. It could be that as we get into early October, we're tracking another powerful system or even a few here in the Eastern Pacific. I don't want to forecast that far out in advance with too much certainty, but it wouldn't surprise me if that kind of first week of October, we're talking about more hurricane activity. Again, even out into October, the season lasts certainly into October, and we've seen some powerful storms getting kind of toward the end of the alphabet in years prior. So just something I'm watching as we get into October. The good news is that particularly for folks in the U.S., whether it be Hawaii or the Western U.S., we know that landfalls are pretty rare. So even if there's a big hurricane, the chance that it affects our weather are pretty low, at least directly. And we'll always keep an eye on those indirect effects. I think that's all I have for you all this evening. Thank you for watching.